This video is sponsored by Connell Guides. To get your hands on the most intelligent study guides on the market for GCSE and A-level English literature, as well as GCSE and A-level history, visit connellguides.com and use code RS15 at checkout for 15% off your order.
How is the theme of age and maturity presented in William Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet? Let's find out. How is it going, Revision Squad? DystopiaJunkie here with another English literature revision video for you. And in this one, we are going to be thinking about how the theme of age and maturity is presented in William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. So to do that, we are going to first break down what your examples or teachers might mean when they ask you to write about how this theme appears in Shakespeare's play. After that, we are going to analyse 10 quotations that relate to this theme, discussing language and incorporating contextual information as we go. Then, right at the end of this video, I will pose a big question for you to think about, and if you're feeling brave enough, answer in the comments section down below. I hope that all of this will help you out as you study or revise Shakespeare's play. If I am able to help you out, please do let me know. You could give this video a like, write a comment on it, share it around with anybody else who might benefit from watching it, and if you aren't already, you could even subscribe to my channel as well. All of that lovely stuff really does help me out absolutely loads, so thank you so much in advance for your support and your engagement. Okay, so this video is about the theme of age and maturity in Romeo and Juliet. But just what exactly does that even mean? Okay, so if I made a mind map breaking down the different ideas that could relate to the theme of age and maturity in Romeo and Juliet, it might look something a little like this. So first, I would consider the obvious. How are young characters presented in the play? What about old characters? Do they behave in ways you might expect people of their age to behave? Are young characters naive, childish, or innocent? Are older characters experienced, wise, or less prone to emotional outbursts? Or are these expectations completely subverted? Now, to complete this analysis, I might consider how the younger generations, such as Romeo, Juliet, Mercutio, and Tybalt, are presented, and how the older characters, such as the parents and Friar Lawrence, appear. Second, this theme does not just encourage us to think about generational differences, because it invites us to think about the relationship between these two groups of characters. In other words, how do the older characters view, speak about, and treat the younger characters, and vice versa? Are these relationships typical for Shakespeare's time, or do they likewise challenge expectations? Next, I would break down what is meant by maturity, and which ideas might relate to that. Now, rather unhelpfully, most dictionaries just define maturity as the state of being mature or of being an adult, but even this can and should be broken down quite a bit. For instance, if you call somebody immature, you often mean that they are silly and not serious, meaning that if you call someone mature, it would mean that they are quite serious or sensible as a person. As such, you could choose to think about Mercutio and Benvolio with this theme in mind, given that Mercutio is often quite humorous and flippant and unserious, especially when with Romeo, whereas Benvolio appears to be much more level-headed and pragmatic about things. You could even argue that the ability to face up to the consequences of one's actions, especially when those consequences aren't great, is quite a grown-up and mature thing to do. As such, moments in the play where characters refuse to accept such consequences, like when Tybalt and Romeo run away after they kill people, these could be moments where a lack of maturity is evident. Maturity also relates to love, relationships, romance, and sex, if you consider it in a more biological sense, for people generally physically mature through puberty and become adults. Likewise, showing a romantic interest in people and possessing lustful desires relates to the theme of age and maturity because it indicates a loss of innocence that is itself an indicator for childhood. Last, and this does somewhat relate to the previous idea, I would say that any character who noticeably grows up over the course of the play is the perfect character to talk about with the theme of age and maturity in mind. Now, one character in particular sticks out to me with this aspect in mind, and that is Juliet. Quite a few of the quotations discussed in this video will relate to her, but not all of them. So I strongly recommend you check out my video about Juliet if you want some further inspiration for quotations you could write about if given this theme. Alright, I hope that has given you a good idea about some of the different ideas that might relate to the theme of age and maturity in Romeo and Juliet. Now then, which quotations could we choose to analyse that relate to this theme? Our first quotation related to the theme of age and maturity occurs in Act 1, Scene 1. Upon seeing his and the Montague's servants brawling, Lord Capulet demands that he is given his sword so that he may take part in the fighting too, to which his wife, Lady Capulet, responds, "A crutch, why call you for a sword?" So these lines are quite nice and straightforward, I think, as they present Lord Capulet as foolish, which they achieve through emphasising his older age. Both sentences that make up these lines contribute to this effect. Lady Capulet's opening exclamation, in which she repeats the noun phrase "a crutch," makes it clear to us that Lord Capulet is old and infirmed and requires some sort of aid to help him to walk. Already this suggests that he is foolish because it is apparent that he wants to fight despite not really being in a fit enough state to do so. Furthermore, when she asks, "Why call you for a sword?" Lady Capulet uses a question to resist her husband's command and bring its sensibleness into doubt, thus reinforcing the impression that he is nothing more than an old fool. As such, Shakespeare creates the impression that older characters might be foolish in his play. Now this is important for two reasons. First, because Shakespeare has subverted the expectation that older people are wise and knowledgeable and sensible, he has created humour, for the subversion of expectations is a key characteristic of comedy. Second, it makes it easier to question Lord Capulet's authority later on in the play, for if he is stupid enough to want to get into a fight despite not being physically up to it, what else is he wrong about? Is he, for example, wrong about trying to dictate Juliet's marital status? Does this, in fact, make it easier for the audience to sympathise with her? Speaking of Juliet, let's consider how other characters discuss her age, suitability for marriage, and her maturity. To do so, let's have a look at a short exchange held between Lord Capulet and Paris, which occurs in Act 1, Scene 2, and it is: "My child is yet a stranger in the world. She hath not seen the change of 14 years. Let 2 more summers wither in their pride, ere we may think her ripe to be a bride. Younger than she are happy mothers made, and too soon marred are those so early made." Now I do appreciate that this is a slightly longer quotation, one that will be tricky to remember in an exam setting, but I've included it in this video because it can prompt multiple analyses that relate to the theme of age and maturity. So rather than remembering absolutely everything I say here, you might instead only want to choose 1 or 2 of the points I make, but that means you do have plenty of options to choose from. First, we could argue that these lines suggest that Juliet is naive, or at least her father thinks she is. This is made apparent by Lord Capulet's use of the noun stranger, which suggests that he thinks that she is naive because she is unfamiliar with the world or because she lacks worldly experience. This naivety implies that Lord Capulet thinks that Juliet is quite innocent too, which is another quality often attributed to children and the young. In Lord Capulet's eyes, then, his daughter is still a child. Although that is not to say that Lord Capulet thinks that Juliet is an absolute baby. When he says that he and Paris can revisit this conversation after 2 more summers have withered, Lord Capulet suggests that he thinks Juliet will be mature enough to be a suitable marriage prospect in only 2 years' time. Paris, on the other hand, is convinced that Juliet is mature enough to marry now. This is evident in his line, "Younger than she are happy mothers made." Paris's use of the comparative adjective younger sees him refer to Elizabethan wedding customs, for it was legal for girls to marry at the age of 12 years old with parental permission, although it was not usual or traditional for this to actually happen. As such, by referring to wedding customs, Paris seems to suggest that Juliet is mature enough and old enough to marry because, with her father's permission, it is legal for her to do so, which is perhaps a fitting stance for a character so closely related to Verona's chief authority figure and lawmaker to have. Last, let's look at Lord Capulet's final line in this exchange. The alliteration evident in marred and maid is especially relevant to the theme of age and maturity. His use of maid echoes Paris's, which referred to Juliet being made a bride, whereas marred is a word that means ruined or spoiled. Because these terms alliterate, their contrasting meanings are highlighted, and so Shakespeare makes it clear that Lord Capulet thinks that marrying Juliet off too early would ruin her, thus providing a warning of the perils of marrying too young. So, there you go. 4 different bits of analysis from 6 lines. I told you having such a long quotation in this video would be worth it. You know what? Lord Capulet is a great character when it comes to the theme of age and maturity, because a lot of what he says and does is relevant to this theme. For instance, let's have a look at how he speaks to Tybalt during the ball scene after the young man has expressed a desire to fight Romeo. "He shall be endured." "What? Good man, boy." "I say he shall." "Go to." "Am I the master here or you?" "Go to." Here, we see a dramatisation of the old asserting their dominance over the young. This is made really apparent through Lord Capulet's use of imperative sentences, commands, throughout these 3 lines. In fact, 3 of the sentences here, which are "he shall be endured" and the repeated sentence "go to," are commands. "He shall be endured" sees Lord Capulet instruct Tybalt to behave himself, something largely achieved by the strong modal verb shall, whereas the short, abrupt command, "go to," is made to appear all the more assertive precisely because it is repeated. Lord Capulet also asserts his dominance over the younger man by referring to social status. His rhetorical question, "Am I the master here or you?" sees him remind Tybalt of his social inferiority to his uncle, whereas the noun good man is a social rank. It is the rank below a gentleman, and so Lord Capulet's use of it suggests that he considers Tybalt to be of a lesser status than he is. Together, these references to social status might suggest that Lord Capulet does not necessarily take Tybalt seriously, which could create the impression that older characters are arrogant or that they belittle younger characters in Romeo and Juliet. Both of these interpretations suggest that older characters think that they are superior to younger characters, which may in fact create sympathy for the young or make an audience feel less favourably about the old. So we're going to stay looking at the Capulet's ball scene with the theme of age and maturity in mind, but we're going to shift our focus to Juliet and look at something that she says. So in this scene, Romeo and Juliet share a sonnet and then kiss at its conclusion. After this, Romeo remarks that Juliet's lips have taken his sin, to which she responds, "Then have my lips the sin that they have took." What does this line mean? Well, to be honest, if you were to imagine that the word from was inserted between have and my, you get the idea. Juliet is telling Romeo to take back his sin from her lips. The entire line, therefore, is a playful euphemism that sees Juliet tell Romeo to kiss her again. With the theme of age and maturity in mind, you could argue that this suggests that Juliet is becoming increasingly mature, or in other words, that she is losing her innocence. Remember that earlier on in the play, Juliet says that marriage is an honour that she dreams not of, suggesting that romance is something she isn't particularly bothered about. And yet now she has met Romeo, she is not just interested in romance, but is actively encouraging its expression. However, I would not say that Juliet is mature in these lines. The increasingly I said is quite important. You see, as much as Juliet's line of dialogue is in fact a command, it is quite demure and unassertive, given that it is devoid of any modal verbs, and given also that it is softened by the euphemistic language with which she expresses it. Here, we therefore see a young woman tentatively experiment with maturity and assertiveness, thus creating the impression that she is naive and inexperienced when it comes to these matters, but that might soon be changing. Remaining in the Capulet ball scene, let's have a quick look at something Juliet says after Romeo leaves, which is, "My grave is like to be my wedding bed." So I want to talk about this quotation for two reasons. First, Juliet claims that her grave will be her wedding bed if Romeo is already married, meaning that she will be ready to die alone if she cannot marry him. On the one hand, this shows her increasing maturity because she is starting to consider marriage and wants to be committed to Romeo, whereas on the other hand, this suggests that Juliet is somewhat immature because she is being quite melodramatic. I mean, she has, after all, only known Romeo for an evening. However, perhaps slightly more interestingly, Juliet's line of dialogue bears metaphorical significance. Graves and wedding beds are similar because they are, in a sense, related to death. I hope that the relationship between graves and death is pretty obvious, but why are wedding beds and death related? Wedding beds are of course associated with the consummation of marriage and sexual intercourse, and given the importance of religious belief in both Elizabethan England and Renaissance Verona, this would most often equate to the loss of virginity. As such, wedding beds are associated with the metaphorical death of innocence. Is Juliet aware of this relationship between graves and wedding beds? We cannot know for sure. However, even if such an indirect reference to sexual intercourse is accidental, it still creates a stronger connection between Juliet and sexual maturity, thus challenging the initial impression of her being a naive child that was created at the start of the play. Moving forwards, let's think about how youth is presented later on in the play when Romeo tells Friar Lawrence that he is now in love with Juliet. The holy man's response is, "Holy St. Francis, what a change is here! Is Rosaline, that thou didst love so dear, so soon forsaken? Young men's love then lies not truly in their hearts, but in their eyes." So across these four lines, I would argue that youth is presented as fickle, ever-changing, and inconsistent. This impression is first created by Friar Lawrence's exclamation, "Holy St. Francis, what a change is here," with the noun change revealing that he is especially shocked by how Romeo has now decided that he loves Juliet, rather than Rosaline. Furthermore, Romeo's fickleness is highlighted by the friar's question in the second and third lines of this quotation. His repetition of the intensifier "so" suggests that Romeo is fickle because it highlights both the extremity with which Romeo adored Rosaline and the suddenness with which this has been abandoned, whereas the fact that Friar Lawrence needs to ask a question at all, even if just to double check that he has understood Romeo properly, highlights the young man's inconsistency. Last, youth's fickleness is reinforced by how Friar Lawrence asserts that young men's love is in their eyes rather than their hearts. The juxtaposition between these two anatomical terms is important, given that heart connotes true love, whereas eyes indicates a more fleeting, impermanent type of love. After all, looks and appearances change and fade. As such, the friar suggests that young men are fickle because they are vain and only attracted to how people look, rather than their inner beauty and their personalities. Next up, I would like to consider a relatively minor quotation, one that I don't really see many people write about or discuss at all. Hopefully that means that this is a slightly less common analysis, which may be of benefit to you as you study or revise Shakespeare's play. So, when the nurse and Romeo meet to discuss Romeo and Juliet's marriage plans, and after Romeo has confirmed that he will indeed marry her, the nurse starts to babble very excitedly, included in which is, "Well, sir, my mistress is the sweetest lady. Lord, when 'twas a little prating thing." So in these two lines, it is pretty clear that the nurse is talking about Juliet, thanks to the possessive "my mistress." But what my attention is drawn to, especially given our thematic focus here, is how she starts to tell a story about when Juliet "'Twas a little prating thing." Why do I think this is important? The words little and prating, which means foolish, stupid, and perhaps naive, connote childhood, youthfulness, and innocence. However, these ideas seem to relate to how Juliet used to be, given that "'twas" is an archaic past tense contraction for "it was." Now, of course, it seems likely that the nurse is about to tell a story about when Juliet was a child, and so the past tense is logical and makes grammatical sense. But this still creates the impression that Juliet is no longer a youthful, innocent child. Now, whether or not the nurse means to suggest that Juliet is grown up doesn't really matter, because regardless, Shakespeare's use of language puts further distance between the idea that she is in fact an immature child. Now let's consider how the theme of age and maturity is presented towards the middle of the play, following Romeo learning that he has been banished from Verona for killing Tybalt. In Act 3, Scene 3, Friar Lawrence attempts to console Romeo, telling him that things aren't too bad, to which Romeo replies, "Thou canst not speak of that thou dost not feel." Here, we see Romeo lash out at Friar Lawrence. This is because the line, "Thou canst not speak of that thou dost not feel," sees Romeo assert that Friar Lawrence does not and cannot understand him, using the sort of rhetoric that one might expect a frustrated adolescent to use. "You don't understand me," and so on. This is particularly cruel because, and Romeo knows this, Friar Lawrence's holy duties mean that he is forbidden from experiencing love firsthand, and so in his frustrated state, Romeo harshly reminds the friar of this fact. As such, Shakespeare dramatises a young character being cruel to an old character, thus demonstrating that the young do not always obey or respect their elders in this play. So in our last quotation, we saw how the young are sometimes unkind to the old in Shakespeare's play. I wonder if the opposite, the old being unkind to the young, is also shown in Romeo and Juliet. Well, how about we turn our attention to Act 3, Scene 5, the part of the play in which Juliet tells her parents that she will not marry Paris. Now, before that part of the conversation happens, Lady Capulet notices that Juliet is crying, which prompts her to ask, "Evermore weeping your cousin's death? What, wilt thou wash him from his grave with tears?" Here, I would say that the older generation of characters is presented as being cruel. This is because the adverb evermore is similar to always or still, thus suggesting that Lady Capulet is expressing shock or even bemusement that Juliet is still supposedly upset about Tybalt's death. This creates the impression that she is unsympathetic or uncaring as a character, given that she does not respect Juliet's sadness. This impression is reinforced by how Lady Capulet then mocks Juliet in the following line, in which she uses a hyperbolic metaphor, "Wilt thou wash him from his grave with tears?" to suggest that Juliet's sadness is so extreme that she could flood Tybalt's grave. Now, I don't know about you, but I think this seems incredibly harsh, especially when you consider that this is Juliet's mother and Tybalt's aunt who is saying these lines, and so as an audience member, you might feel incredibly shocked by them. Between this quotation and the last then, we understand that the older generation and the younger generation do not always interact harmoniously with each other, and that disrespect and unkindness can be found on both sides of the generation gap. And for our last quotation in this video, let's look at what I consider to be one of the most important quotations in the whole of Shakespeare's play, which is, "O happy dagger, this is thy sheath, there rust, and let me die." So I know I've mentioned this quotation in a handful of videos already, including the one on Juliet and the one about power and authority, but how does it relate to the theme of age and maturity? By calling her body a dagger's sheath and requesting that she will die because of this, Juliet's act of suicide is heavily implied by these lines. The fact that she calls the dagger happy creates the impression that this is something she welcomes, not something she necessarily commits out of fear or panic or with any reluctance. Because Juliet willfully commits suicide so that she may be reunited with Romeo, we as an audience see that she is no longer the little girl who will do what her parents ask her to do, but that she has instead become an independent woman who is able to make her own decisions and successfully act upon them. Consequently, because she has outgrown her parents' authority over her, we see that she has indeed finally and totally matured, thus concluding Juliet's developmental journey across the play. And with that quotation discussed, that is my analysis of the theme of age and maturity in Romeo and Juliet complete. But before moving on, I've got a question for you to consider. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare presents maturity as being a desirable quality for a person to have. To what extent do you agree with this statement? Now, what you do with that question is entirely down to you. You could choose to use it to form the basis of a flashcard or mind map. You could use it to spark discussion and debate with your friends and classmates if you are working together, or you could even use it to prompt a short evaluative paragraph. And you know where would be a great place for you to write that paragraph? Yeah, you've got it, the comments section down below. I always love reading the ideas that you lot come up with, and if you're feeling brave enough to share them with me, I'll be sure to respect that by giving them some quick feedback too. So why not give it a go? I look forward to seeing what you have to say. And with that big question still fresh in your mind, I guess it's time for me to wrap up this video. Genuinely, I really do hope that you have found this video to be helpful and that you feel a bit more confident when it comes to Shakespeare's play as a result of watching it. If this video has indeed helped you out, please do let me know by giving it a like, writing a comment on it to let me know, sharing it around with anyone else who might benefit from watching it, and subscribing to my channel if you haven't done so already. All of that lovely stuff really does help me out loads, and it helps me to reach even more people with my content, so I really do appreciate it an awful lot. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Please remember that, as always, I hope that you have an awesome rest of the day. If you are revising, please do remember to take frequent short breaks. As a burned out student, it's not a happy or successful student, which is what I think you deserve to be. So, age and maturity, just how is it presented in Shakespeare's play? Well, you could say that it is presented in Lord Capulet's foolishness, or in Romeo's fickleness, or even in how Juliet goes on a journey from being a naive little girl at the start of the play to a strong, independent woman at its conclusion.